this is true, this would be among the top 3 dumbest things I've ever heard.
Damn. A MAGA Fox News host who used to be a top Trump economic advisor is now pulling out the proverbial knives for his old boss, Donald Trump, publicly referring to a purported plan of his as stupid, even as we get other devastating economic news regarding the Trump administration. The whole thing's a disaster. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we got several clips to watch here. We're going to start with Larry Kudlow, a MAGA Fox News host who used to be one of Donald Trump's top economic advisors in the first Trump administration. He's still very Trump-friendly. They still get along very well, which makes what he has to say here all the more shocking.
So much woo, folks. This is a tough way to end the week if you're long the market. If you're long gold, you're happy, but Dow is losing about 724, the S&P down 113, the NASDAQ down 484. That will do it for us.
Hello, folks. Welcome to Kudlow. I'm Larry Kudlow. So markets crash over 700 points today after a bad inflation report, more tariff confusion. Oh, and by the way, Republicans really going to raise taxes? That could have done it. Our own Sandra Smith, Taylor Riggs.
Okay, so you could probably see where this is going again. We'll get to what he's talking about in just a second, but let's get to the reaction. So again, markets are not doing well under Donald Trump at the moment. Even Fox News hosts are like, ooh, this is a terrible way to end the week. You got Larry Kudlow acknowledging it. This is the same Kudlow who does everything in his power to pretend that everything is glorious under Trump and that Trump is a perfect economic steward, blaming everything on the Biden administration. Well, he's pissed now over the notion that Republicans might raise taxes, and this is what he says.
If this is true, this would be among the top 3 dumbest things I've ever heard. If this...
Okay. All right. Well, who's he talking about? He's talking about his old boss, Trump. Axios has reported this scoop. Trump might let taxes rise for the rich to cover breaks on tips. The Trump administration is discussing a surprising option to help fulfill his campaign trail promises, allowing the richest Americans' tax rates to rise in return for cutting taxes on tips, a senior White House official tells Axios. Some White House officials believe letting income taxes on the very highest earners rise would buy breathing room on other priorities. Wait a minute. Are you saying tax the rich might help actually pay for priorities that could, in theory, potentially benefit lower and middle income households and individuals? What liberal Marxist communist bullshit is this? Except absolutely, of course, that would make sense, wouldn't it? Now, as people have discussed in videos, there are many substantive differences between Donald Trump's very wide notion of tax on tips or cutting taxes on tips with absolutely no constraints, which, as other people have indicated, would be prone to abuse. Corporations could abuse it for their own benefit, compared to Kamala Harris's more substantive approach. But again, let's just walk with this. This is what has Larry Kudlow so exercised and help blunt Democrats' attacks as they seek to extend Trump's 2017 tax cuts. Officials say all discussions are preliminary and nothing is set in stone. Okay. Again, this is just chat. Is it possible? Seems unlikely, given Donald Trump has only ever cut taxes for the rich and corporations and has shown no interest substantively in increasing taxes on the rich and corporations. So I'd be surprised if he does it. But Larry Kudlow, even at the notion of it, is pissed. One of the dumbest things, he says, he's ever heard of. But since we're on the topic of economic news, let's leave the realm of idle chatter, idle preliminary rumors, which totally contradict the sitting president's long history of, again, seeking tax cuts for the rich. Let's talk about the economy in general, because, again, as these clips began, it's not in a good place. Here's another Fox News clip.
When you have 1 year ahead inflation expectations up to 5%, 5-year inflation expectations up to 4.1%, and within the PCE numbers, which is the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, I was looking at the data. 35% of all the components are now growing at 5% or faster on an annualized basis. Now, that's above the 25% that we had in the average. But I mean, peak COVID, it was at 40. I mean, so you're at 35. You're sort of in that range where too many goods are rising at too fast of a price.
So we are getting to COVID era, peak COVID era inflation. Yikes. As Politico reports, modest stagflation risk climbs for Trump as inflation trumps. Let's try that again. Modest stagflation risk climbs for Trump as inflation jumps. Sorry, had a mini stroke there, I think. Barely 2 months after Inauguration Day, voters are sounding alarms over the lack of progress on cost of living issues. Inflation climbed in February as consumers braced for the potential onslaught of higher prices from Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs on U.S. trading partners. The Commerce Department reported Friday that prices rose at a higher than expected annual rate of 2.8% last month, excluding food and energy items, a signal that prices could spike even further in the coming months. That doesn't augur well for price-sensitive businesses and consumers, or for Trump's big plans for the U.S. economy. While administration officials like Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent argue that tariff-related inflation will be transitory, most of Trump's planned levies haven't even taken effect yet. Wall Street analysts are increasingly warning that the U.S. could fall into a period of at least some stagflation, a politically toxic combination of low growth and higher inflation that the country hasn't seen. It's been a long day. In more than 4 decades. I think it was under President Carter, if I remember correctly, the last time we saw it. Today's data has the general pattern of what many observers will be looking for in the months ahead as new tariffs and other policy changes begin to bite. Weaker than expected spending and stronger than expected inflation. David Alcalay, the lead macroeconomist strategist at Lazard Asset Management. I did not mispronounce that. I saw it and I'm like, Lizard Asset Management? At Lazard Asset Management said in a research note, quote, much remains uncertain and it's premature to be drawing judgments about impacts, but seeing this pattern in hard data and not just surveys could feed apprehension. Indeed. February's personal consumption expenditures report did not reflect the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports that kicked in on March 12th. Nor did it incorporate the effects of most of the new levies attached to Chinese, Mexican, or Canadian goods. It predates auto industry tariffs. Snarled auto supply chains were a major driver of post-pandemic inflation, as well as so-called reciprocal tariffs that are scheduled to be imposed next week. Import taxes on pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, copper, and lumber are also being considered. Barely 2 months after Inauguration Day, voters are sounding alarms over Trump's lack of progress on cost of living issues. A Gallup poll released Thursday had him 18 points underwater on his handling of the economy. Ooh! And again, folks, can we stop right there again? I'm sorry, but we got to drive this home. Republicans have enjoyed a perception advantage and polling advantage on the economy for decades. Totally unjustified as far as I'm concerned, because the economy performs better when Democrats are in power. But set the facts aside and let's just go to the perception. That's a huge advantage. And I know Ben Shapiro says, facts don't care about your feelings, gang. And were that true, God, that would be amazing because, again, Democrats would have a colossal advantage. But unfortunately for Democrats, liberals and progressives, when it comes to voting, most people really don't care what the facts are unless they feel what the facts say, right? If somebody feels something in contradiction to the facts, it doesn't matter. They're just going to vote how they feel, right? So feeling is what matters. And Trump, even more than the average Republican, always enjoyed an outsized advantage on the economy because not only was he the Republican candidate, but he is a billionaire, and his celebrity, long before the presidency, came from this perception that he's a brilliant businessman. So for him to be 18 points underwater, 18 points, it's not good. Future tariff-related sticker shocks are unlikely to improve those margins. Quote, it hurts corporate profits, it drives up inflation, Wells Fargo senior economist Tim Quinlan said. Quote, neither of these are a winning strategy from a campaign standpoint or a political standpoint. Joe Lavorgna, the chief economist at SMBC Nikko Securities and a former Trump economic advisor, said in a note to investors that the inflation report strengthened the case for the president's other major policies. These include increasing energy production, which he and other Trump allies say would lower costs, as well as, quote, legislating supply-side initiatives to boost the economy's productive capacity, such as extending the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. But many economists say the incoming tariff barrage could push prices to a point where consumer spending stalls and the economy slows to a crawl. Spending rose by 0.4% last month, according to Commerce's PCE report, falling short of the 0.5% increase that was projected by most economists. Bank of America economists now believe that, quote, modest stagflation is the most likely outcome for the U.S. this year, and that the combination of low growth and elevated prices will keep future interest rates cut by the Federal Reserve on hold. Quote, the reason that we're a little bit prone to stagflation right now, especially the inflation part, is that our starting point is not very favorable. Aditya Bave, a senior economist and managing director at Bank of America. When Trump imposed tariffs on Chinese goods during his first term, inflation was below the Fed's 2% target, and retailers had little precedent for passing higher import costs to consumers. Quote, now there's probably more capacity to do that, he added. Quote, you can see in inflation expectations that consumers are already anticipating it to a certain degree, and at least in certain measures, and that could be self-fulfilling. The University of Michigan's Consumer Survey, which Fed policymakers track to gauge sentiment, on Friday reported that year-ahead inflation expectations rose to 5% in March, the highest reading since November 2022. The increase was seen across party affiliation. Now, that's kind of surprising to me, given, again, the curve on which Donald Trump is graded by his fellow Republicans. It's pretty staggering. Expectations for longer-term inflation also spiked due to, quote, large surge among independents plus a sizable rise among Republicans, according to survey director Joanne Su. To be sure, there's also a school of thought that suggests certain businesses can absorb tariff costs rather than risk pushing consumers past their breaking points. Wells Fargo economists said in a report that goods-related industries have better profit margins than they did during the previous decade, which affords them more room to avoid passing the cost of new tariffs onto consumers. Trump himself has repeatedly warned auto industry CEOs against lifting their prices. Sounds like price control. Is that more communist Marxist stuff, huh? These people would be flipping out if President Biden or Democrats attempted to pressure, the private sector into shrinking their profit margins or not expanding them. That's communist China price control, but Trump's okay to do it. Thus, again, proving it really is about messaging and it's not about policy, and it really will just take a bold Democrat to say, you know what, no, I am going to pressure the private sector to not screw over the consumer, and I don't care if you call me a communist or a Marxist or whatever, because your guys are apparently threatening to do it when it's politically convenient to them, so we don't care what you say. Like, it really is, it's just going to take a bold figure. And, of course, who knows if Trump will actually follow through on his threats, whatever. And Senator Elizabeth Warren this week pressed Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick for information on how the administration will keep big corporations from using tariffs as, quote, a new set of excuses to price gouge American consumers. But regardless of who bears the tariff cost, the political realities of higher prices will prove untenable. Well, how many incumbent parties around the world were strung out over inflation in the past couple of years? Quinlan said, I suspect that's going to be difficult for administration officials to hold these sorts of changes in place for a particularly long time as profit margins come under pressure and as inflation begins to weigh on consumers. So yeah, 18-point gap in Trump's job approval on the economy. Whew, brutal. And this is where we are. So yeah, the economy is not doing well compared to where Trump inherited it from President Biden. Again, the second time in a row that Trump has inherited a good economy from a more competent Democratic predecessor, and he's choosing to drive it into the ground. And his policies are becoming so disastrous or so controversial that even MAGA Fox host Larry Kudlow, former Trump economic advisor, is publicly calling him and them stupid. You'd love to see it. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.